I know we've kind of seen steady declines in terms of gas prices recently. So will that trend continue in the next year?
Well, it will, but it won't be all the time. That is, gas prices tend to go up in the spring, they decrease in the fall. That seasonal ebb and flow is going to continue into 2025. But overall, if you're going to average the price you'll pay at the pump of the year ahead, we expect that it's going to be less that you end up paying in 2025. Gas Buddy predicting that the yearly national average in 2025 will be 3.22 a gallon. That's down 11 cents from 2024's tally of 3.33, but there will be the seasonal ups and downs. But all in all, if you're budgeting for the year, you're likely to spend a little bit less on gas in 2025.
Now, we do have this added factor of potential tariffs. Now, President-elect Trump has threatened to impose 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican imports, but I was just reading from the Energy Information Administration that Canada was 52% of the petroleum imports in 2022 and 60% of the crude oil imports. So, could that have an impact on fuel prices?
Well, it very much could. And that's probably why we, at least, are expecting that tariffs may not happen, at least on oil, because we do receive over 4 million barrels of crude oil from Canada every day. That's a significant volume, and it could have a major impact on gas prices if implemented. So, again, our forecast makes the assumption that tariffs will not happen simply because of the huge potential ramifications. But if we're wrong and they do happen, it could have a drastic and negative impact on what you pay at the pump. Collaterally, it could also have a negative impact on the US and Canadian economies, which is also why we don't think tariffs will be implemented as President Trump has threatened. So we'll have to see, but that does remain a big wild card. Overall, this highlights the policy impacts that could potentially happen under President elect Trump. And it doesn't just stop here. There is the possibility that future impacts could affect things like OPEC's oil production, the US relationship with OPEC, and other countries as well, as President-elect Trump has made other threats to potentially retaliate against entities like the EU if they don't buy enough oil and gas from the United States.
Obviously, policy plays a huge part in fuel prices, the amount of demand there is because of those seasonal changes. But in terms of other factors that play a role, what are the things that people don't often think about when it comes to what has an impact on how much they're paying at the pump?
Well, anything that really touches on supply and demand, anything that alters economics, whether it's a slowdown here in the United States, we're the world's largest oil producer and consumer. So what happens here can have ripple effects. But other things like what happens in China, they are the number two largest oil consumer. The fact that their economy slowed down last year is likely the reason that our gas prices were a little bit below what we expected for 2024. But then also the uncertainty of things like the Federal Reserve and various central banks across the world. How quickly interest rates come down could have an impact on how quickly the economy grows. And then the seasonal factors. Americans drive more in the warmer weather. We also switch back to more expensive blends of gasoline. So the seasonal aspect of things, also including hurricane season, the uncertainty over what will happen between August and September in terms of Mother Nature, that even can play a role on gas prices. So still a lot of wild cards, but overall, we believe that if the 2025 goes to plan, Americans probably won't spend quite as much as they did as in 2024.
And you had mentioned that we are the largest oil producer, but we are still reliant on others. So, kind of explain that. Why is there still that heavy reliance, even though we are the largest producer?
Well, the U.S. has become the largest producer of crude oil worldwide very recently. 10 or 15 years ago, much of our crude oil was still coming from Canada. So the boom in U.S. oil production is relatively new. And a lot of what we've been seeing with this oil coming from Canada has been on the books for 60 years or so. And so it's this reliable, steady supply of oil that has really made up where refineries have gotten their oil from in recent decades. That's probably something that won't shift. It's been a steady, reliable supply of oil. More of the U.S. oil has not been able to get to refineries that are set to process Canadian oil. So it's also things like pipelines, the nature of how those pipelines flow. That's been the status quo for 60 years, whereas the U.S. boom in oil production has been more so in the last 10 to 15 years.
And kind of speak about the infrastructure if you can, because this is another part of this where we have to make sure that we're maintaining the infrastructure that brings us that crude oil. Have we experienced any issues in that sector?
Well, we've seen populations booming in some areas of the country, and infrastructure hasn't always kept up. And that's one of the big differences between administrations. Is the Biden administration winding down now? They have been a little bit less friendly when it comes to building and improving pipelines and other infrastructure that's critical to delivering energy, whereas the Trump administration is likely to be a bit more friendly in improving new pipelines to transmit that energy to where it needs to go, and as well as other infrastructure. So that's something to keep an eye on. There's not a huge roadblock. Pipeline flows are something that don't change very often. But certainly, with natural gas becoming more a fuel being relied on to produce electricity and the rising boom of AI, pipelines are certainly very critical, and building more of them could be necessary. And that could happen on an accelerated basis under the new administration.
In terms of just the simplistic tips that you have for folks when they're looking for gas, you will notice that the station down the street may be 20 cents cheaper. So, what advice do you have in terms of geography when you're looking for where to get gas?
Always be aware of where you are. The cheaper gas may be down the road or behind you. It makes it really easy using an app for that. There's an app for everything nowadays. And of course, an app like Gas Buddy or Google or Waze can show you where those lower prices are. But be very sensitive. A lot of the time when crossing state lines, gasoline taxes can change significantly. The regionality to gasoline is significant as well. Some regions are better supplied than others, and that can cause variations. In addition to shopping around, I think the best other tip is simply how you drive. Your driving habits can really impact how fuel efficient your vehicle is. Things like going the speed limit or setting your cruise even for five below can greatly enhance the amount of miles you get per tank. Aside from that, shopping smarter, using loyalty programs or cash, if there's a benefit to using cash, there's a benefit to different payment methods that can vary. So there's a lot of different ways to save. But again, your driving habits, shopping around, being an educated consumer, and knowing where lower prices are will all better serve you in the year ahead.
The fuel savings over time as well are a lot more than you think because you think it's just a few cents difference, but over a course of a year, it could be up to $300 in some cases. So, it's
Yeah,
worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. For motorists filling up once a week, which is kind of the status quo average, you're filling up 52 times a year potentially. And even a 10 or 20 cent a gallon difference can add up to several $100s. So, and this is not a very time consuming process to be aware and educate yourself on what prices may be. We're talking about just a 10 or 20-second glance at a map to see where gas prices are around you, which can easily help you save, as you mentioned, hundreds of dollars a year.
Well, Patrick Haan of Gas Buddy, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Jaden.
Thank you, and you have a happy new year.